I'm going to talk today about how to parent or strategies to engage with teen and tween children in their most difficult moments. So for Mountain Valley kiddos, sometimes that looks like, we call it their red zone, their most dysregulated moments. And for our parents in the room, obviously, these are probably quite familiar as we're thinking of teens and young adults, moments where it feels too big for them and where they're really unraveling either in your home or certainly for our kids in residential. But this webinar follows the webinar I presented a couple of months ago on understanding how to parent kids with severe anxiety and OCD. And what we're going to start with is really a reminder. So if this is new to you, I'm just going to do a quick overview of understanding the difference between accommodating and supportive parenting. And this comes right out of the SPACE model. Again, I'm just quickly going to say SPACE is a model that Mountain Valley and I am an enormous supporter of. SPACE is an acronym that stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And so one of the sort of cornerstones of the SPACE model, which started at Yale by Ellie Leibovitz, is this idea of accommodation, both parental accommodation, often sibling or social network, family people around our kids who accommodate, even teachers, but it is not the same thing as academic accommodations. So we're not looking at the IEPs and the 504 accommodations. This is really a different meaning of this word. And what Ellie Leibovitz talks about in his model is how parents adapt or modify their own behavior in order to help their child reduce their feeling of distress or anxiety. And accommodation is behavior that 100% of parents, that's an Ellie quote, engage in accommodating behaviors when they're raising anxious kids. So there's no shame and judgment, but ultimately it's the way as parents we try to help our kids feel better. And what we know and what we understand about anxiety profiles and kids with anxiety is the more we jump into rescue and protect them and try to alleviate their anxiety, the less likely they are to try to do the hard work themselves. And it really exacerbates what we call the anxiety spiral. So if a child comes to us and says, "Mom, help, I'm in distress, please rescue me," or "Dad," or whomever, and we do the thing, we rescue, we say, "What about this? Can we try this? Let's go do this." And we really engage in behaviors that help our child reduce their distress. Ultimately, what we are doing is allowing the anxiety to breed and fester and grow. It is counterintuitive to not accommodate, which is why it is so challenging for us as parents, and especially as we're navigating teenage and young adult years, where our kids' anxiety, small kids, small problems, right? But when we have teenagers and young adults, these challenges can feel much bigger and scarier because sometimes the dysregulation is really escalated. So what we define as accommodating behaviors are things that make it less likely for our child to turn inward, to do the hard work, to find the skills, to try to ground themselves, and to ultimately alleviate their anxiety or OCD, Ellie says, or mature or grow. So what we are looking to do and avoid are these types of accommodations, which I imagine are going to feel incredibly familiar to anyone raising kids with mental health challenges, but mostly anxiety. Or anxiety type disorders. So the symptoms of accommodating, rescuing your child from the consequences of their own choices, as in, "I didn't do my homework, so can you call the school and tell them I'm sick today? I never RSVP'd to that event because I was scared to go. Can you call the parents and let them know that I'm not going?" Avoiding going out to events, parties, signing your kid up for things that you think they would enjoy because you don't think they would be able to navigate the challenge. Ignoring or avoiding an issue your child doesn't want to discuss. So a bad grade or a party they weren't invited to for teenagers, or grounding them for behaviors that you would typically, really feel strongly it's against your family's values, but choosing not to do that to avoid the distress that might come up. Accepting or buying into your child's excuses or blaming of others. So really leaning into, yeah, that teacher was terrible. No wonder you couldn't get that work in, or, raise your hand in that class, or I'm sure, the coach on that team is really unfair, and that makes sense why you've been sitting on the bench, or why we have to sort of remove you from this team. Doing something for your child they are capable of and should be doing for themselves, but they don't want to do because it makes them anxious. Trying to control the outcome for your child to achieve favorable results and avoid consequences that might be upsetting to your child. Some examples, one of my faves is we had a kid at Mountain Valley whose parents, she couldn't use the same toothbrush twice, so they had 365 toothbrushes per year available to their daughter. I used to run out in the mornings because my daughter had pretty severe school refusal. And at 5:30 in the morning, I would run to Starbucks to pick up her favorite Starbucks drink and leave it on her desktop right next to her bed when her alarm went off, in the hopes that maybe it would help her to start her day. So supportive parenting, or taking a supportive stance with your child, is really behaviors that make it more likely for your child to mature and grow. Ellie Leibovitz talks quite a bit about the ingredients of supportive parenting, and the most basic and simple, and the ones, if you take nothing away from this webinar today, take this away. He calls it the mac and cheese of supportive parenting. It is empathy and confidence. So I can share with you Ellie's book, and if you want my email to share the book that gives you more information. But the most important ingredient is really understanding your child is struggling and leaning into empathizing with them first, and they must come together, or it doesn't really work in terms of supportive parenting. Come with a confidence that your child can do this hard thing, get through this hard moment, and be successful. And that the team that they have around them can help them. So yourselves, if you are their home team, we're going to talk a bit about a home team, but really having confidence that they can be okay and lean into their own skills and get the support they need. So empathy and confidence, those are sort of, if you're taking any notes, which you don't need to, put those two things on your list. So let's move into really difficult moments. How do we provide support for our kid, a young adult? Again, we're talking about teenagers and young adults here when they are struggling. And we're going to talk about 3 phases of support. The pre-support. So here you are, today is your beginning of your pre-support training, right? What do I do before my kid gets to this place? I'm assuming most of you who are on here are either working with kids who get into that red zone or dysregulate. And I'm also assuming your parents who have young adult children or teenagers who really unravel before you. So this is today your before training. Then we're going to talk about navigating what to do during these difficult moments and how to manage things afterwards, and recap and review. So what to do before, how to prepare yourselves to give helpful support. First, join webinars, read some books, get educated. Really try to have an understanding of how anxiety impacts your own child physically and cognitively. And when I say your child, I mean this particular child you're thinking about today. So if you have 2 children in your home who have anxiety or who get dysregulated often, consider each of them individually, remembering, of course, I'm sure as parents, not one of your kid looks the same as the other. So really starting to think about, how does this child exhibit distress? What would I see in anticipation of them struggling? Do they tap? Do they start to get sweaty? Do they withdraw? Do they hide in their room? Do they put their heads down? Do they deep dive into their phones? Do they isolate? Do they start yelling at other people in the family, right? So really paying attention to the precursors for when your kid's about to sort of really get into a bad headspace. And paying attention doesn't mean responding. This is your work as parents to really be listening to your own sense of your intuition about your kid. Is something going on right now with my child that's going to kind of get them to this next phase of distress? Be aware of how you've accommodated in the past and what that looks like. What do I typically do when my kid starts to struggle? Oh my God, is something happening for you? What's going on? Why do you look upset? You just dropped your head. What's happening here? Do you need me to do something? Should we call that teacher? Should we do, what is your instinct? What is your intuition as a parent, or as a clinician, or as a teacher, if you're a teacher on this webinar, to alleviate that distress for your child, to jump in early and to try to kind of stop it before it starts? And recognize that these are accommodating behaviors we engage in. And when we engage in those behaviors, we are clearly sending a message to our child: you're about to spiral into something that I don't feel I can handle, and I'm scared. That is what accommodating really is about. It's about our response to our kid's distress and thinking our kid can't handle it. So be aware of what kind of behaviors you've engaged in the past. Help other family members. Siblings are amazing at accommodating, right? They don't want to see their brother or sister unravel. It gets ugly in the house then, potentially. So how do they accommodate? Mom, we can all have chicken nuggets tonight if Johnny only can eat chicken nuggets. I'm totally okay with that. I don't have to eat anything else have anything on the table. One of my daughters has a severe OCD reaction to salad. So we used to put menus around all of our meals so that she wouldn't have to see the salad. These are examples of personal accommodations. Have an understanding of common cognitive distortions for you as parents. So here we go again. Tunnel vision. This is just going to get terrible no matter what happens. My kid's going to be a disaster right now. We're never going to get out of the house this morning. I'm never going to get to work. I'm going to have to miss that meeting. This is the only way it can be for my child, and there's no way for us to do anything other than to accommodate. Catastrophizing sort of blended into that. My kid will never be able to handle these things. They're going to not be able to get to school. They're going to fail the test today, which means they're going to fail school, which means they're going to never get into college. They're never going to be able to live a life independent of us. They're going to be in our basement forever. These are ways we as parents catastrophize. And black and white thinking, which is, again, sort of similar. It's all or nothing. Either Johnny's going to have a full-on panic attack, it's going to ruin everything for the day, or we'll be able to fix this quickly, but not being able to see the nuance and the grays that might be happening in front of you. So pay attention to some of the ways your mind shifts into, or what your mind shifts into. I can't do this. I got to get out. I'm running from this, or I have to do everything I can to make this better. Have an understanding of your child's preferred coping strategies. Certainly, if your kid is in therapy, being able to say to your child's clinician, what works for my kid, or in family therapy, right? Or checking in with your kid before they have these meltdowns or these struggles or dysregulate. Can you tell me what might be helpful in those moments for you when you're struggling? Talking about it beforehand. We have our kids at Mountain Valley do an incredible job of working with their parents when they're going home afterwards on what has worked for me at Mountain Valley, what types of grounding skills, what types of things you can do to help. We just had an amazing graduation where we talked about, and what if it gets too big and I'm not helpful? And this kid said, leave me, I've got this. And it was, to my mind, one of the most incredible statements of how far this kid has come, to say, just let me be, I will figure it out. And this is what we are obviously intending for our kids to learn, that they can figure it out for themselves. Gain personal awareness. This is incredibly important and essential. Know what your own experiences are. Often we are raising our kids counter to how we were raised, potentially saying, my parent never showed up for me, so I'm going to really be there all the time, never going to let my kid down. Or my mom was always there all the time, and so I'm going to give my kid space. So really understanding what's happening for you. What is your own personal experience of being parented? What happens to you when your kid starts to struggle? What emotions are coming up for you? Are you afraid of them? Many of our families, certainly Mountain Valley families, have had experiences where their kids have become aggressive or violent or threatened self-harm. But even on the more simple, is it scary when your kid unravels? Worried about your other siblings in the house, and what that's doing to their homework time or their ability to sleep? Are you embarrassed? Are you in public and your kid is about to have a panic attack and you're in the supermarket or you're at a party, or grandma says, what's going on with Johnny? Why is Johnny behaving like this, right? Is there a sense of hopelessness? I'm exhausted from this. I just don't know that I can do this. Really understanding before you show up what's going on for you. One of my favorite Tim Thane quotes. Tim Thane is an author that I love, and he says, check in before you dig in. And this is the moment I'm talking about, really saying to yourself, what's happening for me? Can I show up for my kid in a way that I can be helpful? How do you typically respond? What are your urges? And identify helpful and values-based ways of responding to what's showing up in you to avoid reacting to those experiences when your child's struggling. What does that mean? Do I want to be this person for my kid right now? What's important to me right now? Is it what everybody in the supermarket is thinking of us? Is it how my kid will recover from this? Is it how I model calm for my kid? Really considering your family values, your own personal values as a parent or as a professional, and how to show up for this child in a way that can be supportive. Build your support system. The home team, this is another Tim Thaneism. I can certainly share Tim Thane's book with you all afterwards too. Another guru I have tremendous respect for. Talks quite a bit about the home team. So whether your kid is coming home from residential or whether you're just starting on this journey and noticing your kid is struggling, create a team of support at home, both for you as parents, for you as the professional, and for your child. So that can look like obviously the most a therapist, a psychiatrist, a teacher, an advisor, a mentor, a coach, a clergy member, a cousin, a best friend, helping your child to identify who in their circles supports them in hard moments. Who could they call on if you're not at your best when you're in the room with them? Who might be helpful to you? Can I call Aunt Jane? Would she be helpful to you? Helping your kid develop a home team of support and helping you develop your own personal home team. So also for parents, obviously family therapist, your individual therapist, your yogi, whoever it is for you that makes you feel supported. Build that support system, knowing that you have a child who struggles with and the distress in the house can be overwhelming. Recognize when you need to sort of check out and call on a home team person to come in. We call it passing the baton. Have a vision of what a conversation or act would look like if you are in a difficult moment with your kids. So we talk about sort of in vivo prepping for these moments, right? You can practice on your other kids. You can think in your head, imagine, what is it like, an imaginal experience when my kid is really struggling. I hope you're starting to have those thoughts right now as we're talking, because I would like to ask about some of those moments if we can role play a little bit afterwards. So think about what it would look like if you engaged with your child differently in a supportive way. How can I be helpful to you right now? And imagine those moments and what you would say to your child, how you would engage with your child. So now we're going to lean into what happens in the moment, right? Here we have our kid. They are in their red zone. They're screaming, they're shouting, they're crying, they're potentially throwing things, they're locking their door and hiding in their room, whatever it looks like for this child. Can you start with using good, calm communication skills? This one seems pretty intuitive to most parents, but can you just observe and report rather than judge and critique? So I'm noticing X, right? I'm noticing you're sweating. I'm noticing your face is really red. I'm noticing you are leaning into your phone right now. I'm noticing you are shaking. Can you tell me what's going on for you right now? Help me to understand. Being curious is one of the most helpful ways for your child to go from to, let me think about that. So tell me what's happening for you right now. I can't. I hear you, how hard that is. There's your empathy. But I also feel like I can sense your struggle. Is there anything you can tell me about what's going on in your body right now? So asking some questions and trying to be curious. Use reflective listening and validation. For those of you who've been in this world for a while, the term validation is just constantly being used. Empathy and validation might be the two most salient words we talk about in our field. They matter, and that's why. Validation is essential with empathy. So really saying, I get it. I hear you. I understand this is really hard for you. So reflective listening can look like, if I understand what you're telling me, you're saying it's too hard for you to think clearly right now, or you're completely overwhelmed and frustrated right now. And to validate, it sounds like it's really hard for you. I see you're having a really hard time. These are words that, while they may feel empty and hard in those moments when you're feeling your own distress, can really help your child to feel like they're not alone. And if you can do them in a calm way, help your child to sort of see that you are regulated and that you are not scared of their big emotions. Can you problem solve with them? Which doesn't mean you fix the problem, which is what we are all so good at. But can you help ownership of the solutions land on your kid, right? So tell me some things that might be helpful to you right now. Can you talk to me, or is there anyone else that might be helpful to talk to? What do you think you need to push through this right now? So asking questions rather than, maybe if I got you this, it would be helpful. I could try this. Do you want me to do this for you? Should I go do this? Can we do this? What if we try putting on a calming app, right? Anything that avoids your child owning the regulation themselves and finding the solution is really an accommodation. Now, why do we accommodate? Again, we do it all the time just to get through a day. But ultimately, as we're trying to help our child regulate, it is so important for them to own the solution. If your child is not completely unraveled in the moment, there are some other really good questions that might help them recognize the distortion they're in, right? I can't, this is too hard. I'm a mess. I'll never be okay. This is terrible. Tell me about what you're thinking right now. I just, of course, did that. I'm never going to be able to get this paper in. I'm going to fail out of school. I'm never going to have friends. It's all going to be terrible. Asking your child what the likelihood of this happening will be. Now, for most of our kids, when they're catastrophizing and in this moment, the likelihood of the thing happening that they think is going to happen is very low. If your kid can get into that headspace where they can think through that and they're not completely dysregulated, these are really good questions. But again, if they are really dysregulated, you might have to work on just helping them to figure out what grounding skills or things might be helpful first. What's the evidence for this happening or against this happening? So what's the likelihood that you would really fail that test? Tell me, how many tests have you failed, right? And helping to test the facts for your child is really one strategy. One of my favorites, what would you tell a friend that's having this thought or in this state of mind? Often anxious kids are also the most empathic kids. So they are unable to sort of recognize in themselves what they need, but can be very good friends and very supportive. So if you can think of another friend who struggles, and most of our kids have friends who struggle, what would you tell Julie right now if she was sitting in front of you? What could you say to her that would be helpful? And sometimes our kids can sort of lean in and be like, well, I would tell her to try this. So would that be helpful if I tried that with you? And really, this is, again, much more advanced. And this is for a kid who's really able to sort of, again, be in a headspace that they can hear this. What would be a more balanced and realistic perspective to this catastrophic thought you're having right now? Considering what you know about your child's coping strategies, can you offer to support them as they try to do one or more of those strategies? So if you have a child who says in the advanced before stage said to you, I think, cold ice in my hands is helpful, or I think if I walk outside, it's helpful, or if I do 20 jumping jacks. Can you recommend those things to them in that moment in a way that is leaning into their suggestion? So you told me once, when you get like this, that ice helps. Do you think that you would like me to do something do you want me to go get some ice for you? I know you told me there's an app on your phone. Tell me, do you think that would be helpful? So taking what you've learned in advance and asking them if they think those things would be helpful. Again, if their anxiety is impacting their ability to think clearly, which most often it is in those difficult moments, and impacting their physical functioning, it is much more helpful to engage in some of those sort of initial self-soothing skills with your child that they've talked about have been helpful. If you don't know of those, learn them and help your child to learn them. So in advance to say, hey, did you ever hear about this app that's really good for deep breathing? Or have you heard of this sensation app or that does meditation? And let's explore some of them in advance, because in those hard moments, maybe those would be useful to you. Opposite action is something that we talk about often with our kids at Mountain Valley. It is something that is often very helpful with kids who struggle with depression and with sort of very stuckness in anxiety or OCD spirals. So what are you thinking you would want to do right now? I just want to stay in bed. I want to pull the covers up. I can't do this hard thing. I feel terrible. What would the opposite of that be? Right? Asking your child. Well, I mean, obviously it would be getting up and doing the thing. So let's try that, right? And often we feel like this is like, there's no way that would work with my kid. Are you kidding me? But actually opposite action is really effective. And especially if you talk to your kid about it in advance, and they do a little reading about it. If you say, would you try opposite action just for 5 minutes? What's one thing you could do right now? I can't think of anything. Could you just put your feet on the ground? Well, of course I could put my feet on the ground. Okay, let's just do that, right? And so starting with some really basic grounding skills with your kid. And again, these are hopefully things that you've talked about in advance with your child and had some good conversations. What to avoid in the hardest moments. These feel so obvious, but sometimes it's just good to remember. Lecturing your child. Getting anxious, panicking yourself. And this is, again, a really important moment to not judge yourself, but know your limits. And this is why we talk about know in advance who you are, what is triggering to you. If you're not going to be good at this in the moment, do not be afraid to say to your child, I don't feel like I'm helping you right now. I'm going to step out and I'm going to call someone else from your home team. I'm going to have dad pop in. I'm going to call someone else. And yes, your kid will say, how could you do this? I can't tell you how many times my child said, how dare you leave me in this state? What is wrong with you? What kind of mother walks away? But ultimately showing your kid that you know your own limits and what you're able to navigate, and saying, I'm not panicking. I'm just telling you I'm not helpful right now. I'm going to go find my grounding, right? Get myself in the right headspace, and I will be right back, right? Or come back in 5 minutes to check on you. Avoid threatening your child, obviously. If you don't do this, if you don't get your act together now, if you don't calm down, X will happen. In those most difficult moments, all your child hears when you threaten them is nothing. The noise, the Charlie Brown, ma, 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 ma. So it is unhelpful and can actually dysregulate your child more to say, if you can't get it together, X is going to happen. Try not to convince them there's nothing to be anxious about. Nothing less validating. I'm sure you've all been there when somebody says, really, that seems like nothing you need to be bothered about. Or why are you getting so upset? Or I don't even understand why this is upsetting to you. Ultimately, we each have our own triggers, right? So to really recognize that your kids' feelings and what's happening for them are real, they're big, they're scary, and you telling them there's nothing to worry about doesn't help. It actually can escalate the symptoms and make it worse. Finally, and then we're going to open this up to some conversations, I hope, how to support your kid afterwards. Right? So even if things went really bad, and this is one of my favorite things to remember as a parent, when things are really difficult and you are anxious, to remind yourself that this moment is an opportunity for your child to do something hard, whether they do it well or not. This is their opportunity for both of you. And if you don't do it well, that gives you much more data for next time. So doing it great and it all moving forward and your child gets through a hard moment and everybody's great, that's great. But also when it's terrible and your child has a full-on panic attack or really loses it and throws something, ultimately, if you can use the after time to process, to talk about it, to re-regulate, and to be able to say to your kid, yeah, that was really hard for us. Let's talk about ways we can navigate this differently next time. Can we just make sure everybody mutes themselves? Just because I hear some background noise. Can you compliment your kid for their efforts to try to use their coping skills and their willingness to talk through it with you if they are? If they haven't, obviously, you don't have to, let's not be bogus with our kids. If you're inauthentic, your kids can, especially teenagers and young adults, see right through it. So if they didn't do a great job at this, or they really struggled, or it got super big and difficult for you, afterwards, when everybody has calmed down, by the way, there's always an afterwards. So panic attacks don't last long in a moment. Dysregulated moments most often pass. Sometimes I know we have, for Mountain Valley kids, they can be very long hours, but mostly these really red zone moments don't last more than a certain period of time. I'm sure you've experienced this. So if you can believe they will end, that can be helpful in the moment as well, and they will. So can you compliment your child for their efforts? I know that was super hard, kiddo, and I know you really tried, and next time we're going to do better, and I'm really proud of you. Can you continue to give encouragement and hope that they will be able to increase their ability to manage their anxiety as they keep working at it? So this time was hard. I also know we're going to get better at this, and we're going to keep working at it. And I believe in you. I believe you can do hard things. And I know these big moments feel huge. And also, we're going to just keep working at it. So really partnering with your kid, telling them you're with them. And again, confidence that they can do this. Very hard when you don't believe your kid can do the hard thing, by the way. I often get parents who say, what if I just don't think my kid can regulate, and I don't think they can handle it? And that's often the time to sort of rely on a home team and lean into the supports around your child. Discuss what you and they learned from their experiences, both the successes and the failures. What did I not do well in that moment for you? Well, you were terrible at this and you blah, blah, blah. Okay, tell me how I could have been different. And what did I do well? It was really great, Mom, when you just sat there and you didn't leave me, and you also let me kind of unravel and had faith that I would figure it out. So asking your child to help you, especially teenagers and young adults, are really good at reflecting afterwards. Help them maintain a realistic perspective. Kiddo, I don't expect this to be easy for either one of us, as we are changing the way we are addressing your anxiety. And I know we're going to get there. It's going to take time. We're going to have some bad moments. I'm going to be terrible at this sometimes, and you're going to really struggle, and we're still going to get through it. And over time, you're going to be a success. I have total faith in you.